to the Recovering Out Loud podcast. I'm your host, Charles Van Loucks. Today, I want to talk about hitting that reset button in life. Now, a lot of people think that, getting into recovery is a bad thing because there's a negative connotation attached to it, like we failed or we messed our lives up or, something like that. But I'm going to challenge that. And so let's see, let me back up. For myself, early on, I remember always kind of feeling different, right? Like I had, a different rule book that I was following or something like that. No, I was always looking for guidance, whether it was a career coach or a guidance counselor or, whatever it was. I was always looking, like I felt like I was always missing something. And I think that this kind of affected me for a long time when I was younger. And I can tell you that today, going through recovery and doing all this work that I have, I've found that peace now. So, and you know what? I've heard a lot of other people who are in recovery talk about that as well. Like for example, Mike Wagner and I, in our episode part two, um, we touched on that as well, right? It's like this ability to clear the wreckage of our past and, you know, feel all these things that we need to feel clean and sober so that we can identify them, name them, and then do work around them, right? Whatever those things are for each person. But I feel like once you've, done that work, right? Once you have stability in your life, you're not putting out fires, you're not, any of that stuff. I feel like that's where the real gifts come in, being able to show up for our family and be present, right? Being comfortable in our own skin, right? Being happy just for no reason, just being happy in general, right? Being able to see an image like a field of dead grass with one flower growing out of the middle of it. Now, is that a depressing image or is that an inspiring image? Right? It all depends on our perspective, and it depends on where we're at mentally. Today, I think that's a very inspiring image, right? Like all that death doesn't hold back life. This beautiful flower is still able to bloom from all this death. It's beautiful, right? But I can tell you that exact example, I experienced a negative version of that too. And I used to see, a good chunk of life like that. And I think those are some of the gifts, that they kind of come along with all this. So, for me, I consider getting into recovery hitting the reset button like you would in a video game, right? You come to a point in a video game where you fall into a pit. Game's over, right? You got to restart. You got to figure it out. You can't just lay in the pit and die, right? That doesn't work. So you hit that reset button and you start over. And that's exactly what we do in recovery because at the end of the day, recovery is all about figuring what our things are that we need to address, right? Improving our quality of life, right? Figuring out, different tools and things that we can do to help improve our situation, communicating better. I mean, all kinds of stuff. But the thing is, once we've kind of figured those different things out and we've put work towards it, that area of our life becomes a little bit more stable, right? So, you know, for example, communication, right? Like let's say, every time you see your significant other, every time you see your partner, you guys argue or you fight or something, right? There's something going on there that's causing some instability in your life, right? And this is, I mean, you don't even have to be in recovery or addiction for that matter to relate to, fighting with your significant other, right? But in that situation, that's a very clear area where we need to improve. But if we then choose to drink and use and kind of put a band-aid over that so that we don't feel it as much, right? We kind of, dissociate away from it, right? Then, that can become a problem because at the end we're just avoiding it. So by removing the substances, we're then able to feel what that is. And then we can know, oh, wow, yeah, I do need to do some work around, my relationship, right? Or communication or whatever. And that's where the start of those gifts come in. Being able to feel and name those things in our life that we need to improve, right? Because in early recovery for myself, it felt like everything was just happening to me. I had no control over it. Everything was turned up to 11. I didn't know what to do, right? So going from that kind of chaos, right, to being able to feel and name these different things in our life that are impacting us negatively, that's huge. That's huge because then we can see a couples counselor, we can see a therapist, we can learn how to communicate, we can, learn how to listen, right? We can learn how to compromise, whatever it is, and then we improve that part of our life. So there's definitely a reset, very positive kind of side to all of this. And I challenge people to try and view it in that way, right? It's not a shortcoming, it's not a failure, it's not any of that, right? Being able to look in the mirror and see something that we don't like about ourselves or about life or about whatever, but then have the courage to then take that information and do something about it, that's courageous. That's really difficult to do, right? Very, very difficult. But that's what it takes, because far too many people get comfortable in their chaos. Whatever that chaos is in their life, they find ways to adapt to it and then become comfortable with all kinds of crazy situations, right? So I challenge you to try and take a step back from that. And if there's something you feel isn't right, if that little voice inside you is saying something's not right, I don't like something about this situation or about my life or whatever, do something about it, right? The only way that we can get out of these kinds of things is through action. And sometimes it's painful. Sometimes it's difficult, but we just have to get through it. And by using supports, by allowing professionals to come in and assist us, we do it in a safe manner, right? We make sure that we have a guide so that we're heading towards the right end result, that kind of stuff. And I think also just having people who have been there before, and found success, and letting them teach you some of their tricks, right? Some of their tools that they've learned along the way. Um, so, a lot of this, in my opinion, is about perspective, right? I can either, see myself as a failure and, oh my God, I had to go to rehab and blah, 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 blah. I could choose that. That's a choice. It's perspective, right? Or I could say, man, I got caught up in a lifestyle and I got to a point where I needed help. But I took that help and I excelled, right? You feel the difference? So that's the important part, is to focus on how we word these things to ourselves, how we speak to ourselves, right? Because this is all connected, you know? Like if I think of myself daily as a failure, and every time I mess something up, I beat myself up over it a million times worse than anyone else ever would, that's going to affect how I see myself. Then that in turn is going to affect how I show up for people in my life. It's going to affect my confidence, my self-esteem. It's going to affect, the how I do at work. It's going to affect so many things. So keep that in mind, when you're going through this. Keep that in mind because, getting through especially early recovery and starting to get some stability in your life and starting to have some of these, gifts of recovery come about, it's night and day. It's night and day. You know, it's a huge relief, and it's a booster. You know, it's a booster to, you know, just continuing to push forward and, you know, improve in life and all that, you know. Because I think for a lot of people early on, it can be discouraging when we don't see immediate results. You know, it all comes back to that instant gratification. That's the whole reason why we were attracted to drugs and alcohol so much, right? Because we knew that that substance would immediately do what we needed it to do, right? But it doesn't last. It's not real. It's a band aid, right? And underneath that band aid, our wound just festers. So try to remove the band aid and truly treat that wound. You know, put in the work, do the therapy, do the treatment, work a set of steps, man, do all of it. You know, do all of it. Why not? You know, because I can tell you that I have learned something from every type of treatment that I've been through. And all of those things have led me to a place where in February I'll have 10 years, right? So it just takes trying different things, being open minded, being teachable, realizing that we cannot logically think our way out of this problem. Sometimes we have to reset, and we have to let other people help. But then we got to take the help, right? We got to accept the help and really work through it and really be fully committed. That's what it takes, you know? So just remember that it gets better. It truly gets better, you know? And if you feel like you're struggling, man, reach out to somebody, you know, get a coach, get a therapist, get whatever you relate to, right? But just having that source of support and hope and a guide and all that could really make the difference. So I challenge all of my awesome listeners to try and change your perspective, right? Try and view this as hitting the reset button and moving on to a brand new chapter of life that gets better than we ever thought it could. Because it's true. All right. Later.